You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. I'm Dale Sellers, Executive Director of 95 Network. And I am so thrilled to have a dear friend with me today this is not his first round. This is not his first rodeo with podcasting. This is an old seasoned podcast guest. Mark Pritchard is with me today.
You may have oversold it, Dale.
Mark is the pastor at Church at the Gates in Missoula, Montana. How you doing, bro?
Doing good, man. It's like 88 degrees here. All my staff is working hard, and we're doing well. Yeah.
Well, you know what? It's the end of August, so you guys have 88 degrees today. In about a month, it'll be snowing.
Lord willing. That's right.
I do love coming into Missoula. I don't like landing in a plane coming into Missoula, but I do love coming there. It's so beautiful. And as many of our listeners know, my daughter and son-in-law live in Bozeman, which is 4 hours east of you. But right. That is such a beautiful state. And I just love coming there and working with your church. And we've worked together for years. So what we're going to do, I want to take a quick break. And after the break, I want to come back and kind of hear your story and kind of talk about the effect of, recently we did a VisionDay together. And we'll talk about how that works. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're here with Mark Pritchard from Church at the Gates in Missoula, Montana. Hey, Mark, before we kind of dive into what we want our content today, kind of tell us your story a little bit.
Yeah. So like the long and short of it is I was a pastor's kid, grew up in ministry. My dad was a pastor of a church, large church just outside of Chicago. And so grew up in ministry, went to Moody Bible Institute somewhat reluctantly. It was one of those things where I said, I'm never going here. And I ended up there. And then right after that, I ended up in China for 2 years after telling God I would never go there. And it's funny, like I just stopped saying that.
I was going to say, let me give you a hint. See, I'll never be a millionaire.
Or just start saying, I'd never be a millionaire.
Yeah. It seems to be working that way for you.
That's right. So I went and taught English in China for 2 years, and my wife, who's from California, it's where I met her. We came home back to the States, got married. I went to seminary at Dallas Theological Seminary, and then went and did ministry in Northern California for a couple of years as an associate pastor at a great church called Hessel Church in California. I met one of the most generous and gracious pastors who have ever been a chance to learn under and hear from. And so kind of just under his tutelage for a couple of years. And then after a couple of years kind of said, man, you've been so generous. You've given me everything here at this job. I feel like I've reached the ceiling of not what I can know, but of the experiences I can have. Mm-hmm. And he was like, well, I'm not resigning anytime soon. And I said, good. Help me kind of take the next step, and ended up in Missoula, Montana at Church at the Gates. It'll be 6 years here in October that we've been here. And it's been full of tons of really humiliating learning moments, but also really just it's easy on the other side of the desk to say, absolutely, and all of that. But there's also been a bunch of really great growth that God has been so gracious, whether that's in me or my wife or in the church in general. So we love Missoula, and despite its 10 months of oppressive sunlessness, we've just grown to love the culture here.
Those 2 months of sun are worth it all.
So good.
Y'all have such a beautiful golf course. You see it on the main drive right in, and I look at it, and I was with you recently in the summer, and it's the first time I've ever seen it.
That's right. It's not under 2 feet of snow. Yeah.
So what's it like pastoring a church in Missoula, Montana? You're a college town, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So the U of M, University of Montana, the only important university in Montana. I'm going to say that. I don't care about what happens in Bozeman. Mm-hmm. But so they really have driven the culture here and as many college towns do. The university is usually that biggest employer and the biggest culture driver. And so if you want to understand Missoula in general, it's the place where you're going to find the Prius that has the bumper sticker, don't confiscate all guns, next to the jacked up F-350 spewing carbon, earth killing exhaust or whatever, with you're never taking my guns. That's the city we live in. And so it's got these dual conflicts, and people who've grown up in Missoula hate all the changes and hate all of it. But we've got a bunch of great hospitals. It's a great city, but it by per capita has more religious nuns, NONES, than San Francisco. So we live at a higher
No, that
percentage.
wasn't Catholic nuns.
Right.
N-U-N-S. That was
Right. People who wrote-
N-O-N-E-S. Have no religious affiliation. Yeah.
Yeah. So like in Missoula proper, in Missoula and Ravalli, so the two big counties, there's 100 and some thousand people, but 114 of them identify as nuns. So 7 out of 10 people we meet either have no desire for religious affiliation or reject it outright. And so in some ways, like it's hard ground, but it's like full of opportunity, like it's a neat place to do ministry.
Has it ever been a more Christian oriented town, or is it, as far as you know, always kind of had that vibe it has now? Or did the college change? Of course, colleges often change communities, and
for sure
that may be what happened. I don't know.
Well, so like missiologically, so we said like the movement of the gospel in America, the reason places like the West and the Northwest secularized so quickly is because they didn't have 50, 60, or 100 years of Christian institutions influencing them. And so, so Missoula has been like theologically conservative, religiously conservative, but because we don't have, like, I think the first church founded in Missoula was like 1888 or 1889. Whereas like if you go down to Dallas or these other places in the South, there's just legacies of large churches and historical, cultural. And so that's just not here. Yeah. That's not to say they haven't had a history of it, but it's never been the same kind of entrenched cultural understanding that it is in other places where the gospel's been for longer.
So the people generally are not open to the gospel then?
I'd say I don't introduce myself as a pastor very often.
What I do on a plane, I shouldn't tell this. What I do on a plane, if I sit beside someone and I'm just really tired and I don't want to talk, I tell them I'm a pastor. But if I sit down beside somebody and I feel like having a conversation, I tell them I'm a consultant.
They stiffen because they think you're a certain type of thing and all of that. But like we love Missoula, and like our church is seeing conversations happen that we've been praying for. And we're seeing, like, it's just I'm proud of my church and how hard they're laboring in really hard ground, but for the gospel with their neighbors.
And I think you having the missions background, especially you said in China, that have prepared you somewhat for what you're doing. So part of me having you on today is if people have been to our website before and they checked out our Vision Day, there's actually a podcast on there right now of me and you talking from a Vision Day type, a strategic planning retreat we did there 5 years ago. But recently we had another one, and when you had me come back in, kind of walk through what the first one was like for you, and then why was there a need for a second one?
So if people have listened to your highest rated podcast ever, the one we did, obviously that's
it's way up there.
It's way up there, right? Under all of the rest of them. Like I say something to the effect of like, it's my first senior pastorate. I'd been here a year. And when I looked at like all the areas the church was stuck in, like the locus of the decision-making had stalled at me. I just didn't know how to lead. I could preach, I could love people, but in terms of like, and how do you lead a church with a board, with multi-staff, with a large budget, all these things like that, like seminary can't really adequately prepare you for. Like we rag on seminary all the time, but like they can't do that. It's kind of outside of it's experience-based, right? Like I wasn't going to learn some of that in a classroom. I had to learn just being behind the desk. And so we chatted through like, man, I wonder if there's someone we can bring in that could help like galvanize our team, our elders and staff towards a direction and create like the right kind of structure, help us create the right kind of structure for growth here at the church, but also on staff. And so we called the Unstuck group and we, by God's providence, got you, and you came out, and we went through what was like an emotional beatdown of like a day and a half. It's just like, and I know look, your process now is so much like, the one that you do now is so much more inviting, less rigorous, produces the same results. But like we were there for you Friday night and then all day Saturday and then had to preach the next day. But we were going through the history of the church and who we are. And but it was so good. The end result was like we had unity. We were heading the same direction. And so over the last year or year and a half at our church, we've had some pretty key transitions on staff, whether that was our pastor of adult ministry, our pastor of worship, and then like just elders cycling in and out based on like recruiting new elders, but also then timing some of our elders terming out. And so we just felt like, man, we really need to reset after COVID because kind of just operate in that same habit. And I wanted to get the right kind of galvanization and unity. And so we called you again to see if you could help walk us through that process. And man, like I was just talking with one of our staff members literally like 15 minutes before we got on this. And he was like, we were recalling, you coming out and how powerful it was to have everyone on the same page, go in the same direction. And he was like, I would have paid triple that. And I go, well, you don't have,
Well,
you don't
passed that long ahead of time.
100%. Right. But and it's true to you,
Yeah.
that kind of God spirit-led unity in a church leadership is hard to come by. Once you get it, you got to fight to keep it. And so it's been, I know you were talking about the one 5 years ago, but the one we just did that wasn't like this, major work of arduous, emotional, whatever. I mean, it was great to end where we ended and to do it in, 6 or 7 hours. It was awesome. Yeah.
Well, I was trained in the StratOp process. StratOp's a phenomenal program. So that's my foundation. But the StratOp process was designed to be done over 3 8-hour days.
Yeah.
Well, I knew from the start when I learned how to do strategic planning, when I learned StratOp, that I wanted to work with small and mid-sized churches. So I knew that was too much. And so I immediately kind of curtailed it to where I could do it on a Friday night and Saturday and wrap it up on Sunday. But honestly, here was the schedule back then. It was Friday night from 6 to 9. Yep. Saturday all day from 9 to 6. And then Sunday after church, I would do Secret Shopper or either preach, one of those. And then after church, we'd go from 1 to 6. And I'm going, I'm exhausted. And and again, I should be, because I'm the guy up front trying to make it happen. Right. And then while I worked at Unstuck, Tony he just kind of revamped the whole process and just said, that's too much. And so actually, when I came to you, we were doing the more scaled down process.
Right.
But honestly, since I left Unstuck and they've moved on, Tony's created a whole new process that's and it's even more curtailed to the church. Well, I'm sitting here going, okay, we work mostly at 95 Network with small and mid-sized churches. First of all, most of these churches have never heard of a strategic planning process and are automatically resistant to it, don't want it to happen, don't believe in it. You're trying to turn this into a business. I hear that all the time. But I always ask this question. Okay, so if you're so opposed to business principles, why do you always have your most successful business people on your board? And everything gets quiet. So anyway, we'll keep going. But anyway, I wanted to come up with a process that we could start at 9 in the morning and be done. And I told you guys we'd be done by 4. We finished at your place about 3. Because I always want to get done early, because I feel like it's better to get you one action item that you can focus on, that you can implement, than give you 3 or 4 that it weighs you down. And another core value of what we do is, and you experience this, I'm not there to add pressure to the pastor. I'm there to lift the pastor's load.
Yep.
I'm not there saying, okay, pastor, here we come, all this stuff here, you implement it, because we assign teams at the end of it all. So kind of talk from a pastoral perspective. Sure. What's it like to experience the outside eyes coming in? And we had some tense moments. There was a couple of tense moments in there.
You and I had a couple of tense moments.
I want to dive into that a little bit, because the reason I share that is this, Mark. I used to try to smooth those over. I don't mean we got in a fight. Some things came to the surface, but that's the purpose of this thing, is to help you find the underlying deals that we can focus on, so we can everybody rally around each other. And so dive in a little bit. What's the benefit of having outside eyes come in and share with you?
I actually think I've talked to my staff multiple times about what we just experienced, and for the vast majority of them, it was just you and me, and I think Mark Resch were the only guys who'd been there, 5 years ago. And so to everyone else, it was new. And I think what they loved about it was, one, there was someone who did not have any skin in the game, right? You're not attached to any of the bad stuff. You're not attached to any of the good stuff. You're there to help facilitate the conversation.
And let me interject here. I don't find out. A lot of consultants get a lot of preloaded information. Yep. I don't like doing that. Yep. I like to come in and not know certain things, so I can, by the Holy Spirit, wander into things I'm not supposed to talk about.
Right. And I think that's for us, you were there. There were a couple of moments where we were hashing through some of the more difficult things that's happened in the last with transition in the last couple of years, and talking to my staff, it was really cathartic to do that with someone who wasn't me, who wasn't the board member, and you didn't really have an opinion of a couple of things, but ultimately there was this context where we could, our staff experienced that really emotionally, and it was healing. It was healing in the right way to be able to ask those questions and then allow that to breathe, right? And allow us to say, okay, no, this has been difficult for the church, has been difficult for the staff, and it doesn't have to end us.
That's
It
right.
doesn't have to be the end of the story for us. And so, and it wasn't going to be like, but there's, with church conflict, it can feel like you can't get over it. It feel like that it just defines who you are going forward. And so, like for us, the process was great. I mean, I think for most churches who don't know their history, right?
Yeah.
One of the most important things that I think we found most helpful was to see patterns of our church history. And as soon as we went through that, which was, I don't know, at like 9:30, you knew exactly at that moment what the end of our scope was going to be.
Very first thing we dealt with.
And all of us, when you pointed out to this pattern that is in our church history related to a couple of different things, like we all knew at that point what it was going to be, and we never would have gotten there ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We never would have gotten there without someone helping the Holy Spirit lead these conversations and really giving room for that in a way that was not like, it was great. It was great.
Well, the first thing we always do, and I used to think, is this not a waste of time? When I first learned how to do the process and do strategic planning, I've discovered it's maybe the most important thing we do. But we do a thing, I call it historical highlights. Mm-hmm. And we just go through like the last 40 years or so of a church. And your church is not much older than 40 years, if I remember that correctly. And so we were able to look at the whole history of the church. Well, what we began to discover was there was these patterns that happened because you'd had some pastors in the past who had actually really built the church, and then they kind of left abruptly. And it began to create this distrust within the congregation, which we understood. We get it, And so, but we also saw that you guys were on a trajectory to kind of continue that going if you don't address it. I think about one church that I worked with years ago, and I'll never forget this, Mark. I was working with the church, and this might have been 2020 when we did it, but we're talking through their history, and we went back about 40 years, and then we all of a sudden, it seemed like everybody we'd get to, but then 2014 happened. Right. And then I keep going, and I'm going, okay. And someone else would say, yeah, we had this momentum and people were being saved. And then 2014 happened. And so 2 or 3 people finally said that. And, I'm trying to chart this stuff down, and everything comes back to 2014. Now we're doing this Vision Day in 2020. So finally I just set my pen down or my marker down. And I said, okay, let's take a break here. And I want you to understand, when we normally do a Vision Day, we like to have no more than 10 to 12 leaders, staffers, elders in the room, if that's possible. The smaller, the better, actually. And this particular day, they had 24 people in the room. And that was okay. We made it work. But when I said, okay, folks, time out. What happened in 2014? And when I said that, the senior pastor began to wail. Began to just cry uncontrollably. And there'd been a horrible devastation that happened to the church in 2014, and they were stuck there. This is 6 years later. They're stuck there. And so the historical highlights, it does 2 things. One, it helps you, like we did with your church, see if there's any patterns happening, but it also brings all the new staff or people who weren't here for those things. It brings them up to speed. And so what happens, it gets everybody on the same page, because you have new staff and new people at your church all the time wondering, why don't we do things the way we do that? Why don't we do that way or that way? The historical highlights helps you do that. And that kind of happened for you guys. Yeah.
I think it was good we had 2 new elders, 2 new staff members who a lot of this was new in terms of the details of why certain things happened. Mm-hmm. Like they had known about the pastoral transitions, but we have no interest in bashing previous pastors or anything like that. No. And so I stand on them, good and bad. And the guy after me is going to stand on me, good and bad.
We all do that. We all sit on the shoulders of people who went before us. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for our guys, it was helpful. Our staff, it was helpful for them to see kind of who we are as a church and kind of what makes us up. And we've changed a lot as a church since those times. And yet we also know if this is true, a pattern that we need to be cognizant of it. And it was super galvanizing. That moment was unified right then. And, we remember all the rest of the charts you did, but it was we all knew in that moment what the next 6 hours were going to be solving.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that you can over spiritualize it, but I really rely on the Holy Spirit to guide us in those processes. I have a schedule, and I promised you guys when we start, hey, at 4:00 we're done today, or 4:30 we're done. Yeah, I will get us there, but I have to let it breathe, and that's the hard part of being a facilitator, because I've done 55 of these things now. The hard part is, okay, don't just get through it because you've got a schedule. Let that thing breathe and let it percolate. And I've got to say, and we'll talk a little bit more about it toward the end, but the moment that we had the revelation of what you guys needed to focus on was so refreshing to me, because it was more of an ambiguous thing to address versus a specific, oh, well, if you're going to build that new building, that'll solve the problem. This was more ingrained inside the hearts of people. And so I was extremely pleased with what happened in that Vision Day. So what I want to do is we're going to take a short break, and when we come back from the break, I want to kind of walk through what we covered at the Vision Day and how it impacted our you guys as far as helping give you clear direction of where we're going. Is that cool?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, welcome back, everybody. But before we get back into this, I want to remind you that one of the things we've added to the 95 Network, 95 being the numbers 9 and 5, 95network.org website, is a whole new area called Soul Care Essentials. We are very concerned today on this side of the pandemic. I don't believe we're post-pandemic, but on this side of the pandemic, we're very concerned about the health, emotional health, the spiritual health, if you will, of most of our leaders. And I think a lot of folks have just been beat up. And so if you're listening today, and maybe it's the first time you've listened, go to the website. It's on the homepage at 95network.org. Click on that link there in that pop-up box that says Soul Care Essentials. And it's just going to walk you through some things to help you kind of get yourself built back up again. Now, you may be at a place where you're going, okay, you know what, I'm doing pretty good personally, but I need some direction in my church. There's another box right beside that called the Healthy Church Assessment. If you'll take a moment and click on that, it'll help you maybe find some things you can do to help you in moving forward, kind of like what we're talking about with Mark today in your strategic planning. And we want to help you. So please reach out to us at 95network.org and let us help you any way we can, because we love small, mid-sized church pastors. In fact, this guy I have on today, I hate to say it to his face, he's one of my favorite. I mean, Mark and I connected at the very beginning, even before I was at 95 Network, when I was working with Unstuck, long before I came here. And I've worked with you multiple times. We've been a follow-up visit. You and I've done lots of calls together, and it's a privilege for me to be able to do what I do. But I got to tell you, it makes me jealous, because Mark, when I was pastoring my small church for 12 years, I didn't have a me.
Yeah,
I didn't have anybody like 95 Network or some of the other organizations that exist. Who just believe, see, I love your church. I want your church to be successful.
Yeah.
I want every lost soul in Missoula to know Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that's why I love working with you and supporting you. And I will, as long as I live, I've made this commitment to you a long time ago. I will be there for you guys. Is any way I can help at all.
Yeah.
And that's why I love being with you. So here I am. I've come back 5 years later. We're doing a Vision Day, and we're working through the process. So the first thing we do is we do the historical highlights, and we kind of focused on that. The next thing we do is we talk about kind of connecting with your primary demographic, if you will. Why is that important for you?
I mean, I think, what was interesting in that conversation is, like, nothing was new. I mean, I think most churches kind of have a similar aim, but it was really helpful for that process to say, okay, if these are the people we need, and these are the people that the secondary and third, kind of like how we really minister to this group of people. The part that was really most helpful for us was to say, okay, here are their values. Here are the things that, like, we need to identify, and not necessarily like have their same values, but be able to say, we need to understand who the people we are ministering to, so that contextually we're not like white noise.
Yes.
And so like that was a ton of fun for our group. And I mean, we had like 70 different things, and then we had a little bit of conflict, and
we had to pull it down to 5.
Right. And like, what does this mean when we say that? I remember, and like, it was very helpful. I mean, because as we're wrestling, I forget what the term was. Oh man. Well, I don't know. One of the young terms. Oh man.
Yeah.
All the kids.
Social justice.
Social justice. What it was. And we were like,
justice.
I was like, okay, well, I don't know what that means. And then one generation in the room was like, well, it means this. And then the rest of us old people, I'm like 40, so I'm like a grandpa now to that generation. Like, well, that's not what it means. And it was helpful for you to help. Like we weren't going to get past that moment without you, and you helping bring clarity to, okay, well, what if it means this? And you tied it together in a way that we could say, okay, we do this and this and this. And if we define it that way, then we understand what like the non-Christians are about, but also how we can speak into that. And so, like, for me, I think, like, when you brought out, like, okay, what's our target demographic? And we've done that work. And we a few years ago we fine-tuned our vision to that, to like do these 5,000 meals and all of that. And so we like that wasn't as helpful to us because we already knew we were shooting at, but also really helpful to say, okay, well, let's revisit these values. Does our church speak to these things? Do they address it in a way? Do they call people out of their lives in a way that is compelling in the Northwest, in Missoula, Montana, not pretending we're some other church somewhere else? And so that's super helpful to have the discussions and have everyone kind of weigh in and vote and say, oh man, this totally makes sense.
So to make it clear for all you listening, what we do is once the church picks their primary demographic, and to be very honest with you, most churches pick, 25 to 40-year-olds with children who are either unchurched or de-churched, which means they used to go to church. But then we spend some time talking about what do they value. And this, and even for me, I'm 60. Mark, how old are you?
40.
Yeah, you're 40, so 20 years apart. Even for me, in our generation, our mindset is, well, this is what they should value.
Right.
And I think even your generation still has a little bit of that vibe.
Well, as a pastor, that's my default to go, okay, this is what they should value. And the question isn't what they should value, it's what they actually currently value. Because if we don't know that, we can't speak to them.
So what we do, and this is why it's so important, if you do a Vision Day, that you have some people in the demographic you want to reach actually in the room that day. So we listed, and I don't know if it was 70, but it was a lot, a big old list of things that we say, okay, this is what this current generation values. Then you guys have to come forward and pick the top 5. Well, that's hard. But you pick the top 5 of what they value. And even if it's something we disagree with, even if we go, that's terrible, they shouldn't value that. That's not the point. Right. The point isn't that we don't like it. The point is we understand they do it. And then we spend a little time going, okay, with these top 5 you picked, how are you doing as a church at addressing this stuff? And that's when it got fun.
I think too, as a pastor who hasn't experienced this, maybe listening and say, okay, well, like, I don't want my pulpit to be like taken in by all these values. And like the word of God is the thing we value the most. It's like 100%.
Yes.
But like, if you're going to bust up the idols on the mountains, you have to know where they're at, and you have to get close to them to bash them up. Right. Like that's a piece of it. So like knowing where the idols are so we can go up to them, speak God's truth into them and allow those to crumble. Like otherwise you're just going up whatever mountain and trying to find the right idols.
A lot of people are looking for those. They're looking for Jesus. They're looking for God when they find the idols. They're just trying to fill that hole in their heart.
100%.
But if we don't understand and this is even important today, if we are so negative, if everybody, that church, they're known for being against everything. I'm so tired of churches being known for what they're against. Wouldn't it be nice for some people to be known what they're for? Man, we're for you. We're for loving God and we're for loving people. That's kind of the gospel and how it breaks down. And so when you understand, even if you don't agree with their values, it helps you. And so we broke that down. We looked at it, and then we needed a lunch break.
We did. The temperature needed to come down in the room a little bit.
We had a lunch break. And so then we come back after.
When I say that, like, it wasn't, no one was angry, but we were having robust conversations about about what our culture is.
Yes.
And like, it was so valuable, and everyone having a voice and like going back and forth, these robust, intense conversations where it's like, oh man, like we've got it. Like we've wrestled with this.
If we don't talk about what's really happening, we're going to be irrelevant. And honestly, I have mentioned this to you guys when I was with you, but I believe we're in the midst of a reformation. I believe the Church of Jesus Christ in America, at least, is being reformed. I think the Church of Jesus Christ around the world is very healthy. I think the church in America has got cancer. And because we continue to keep trying to do the same old thing, the same old way. And so we've got to be aware, not that we compromise the message, not that we water it down. And you and me, we're kind of like going at each other a little bit there because you thought I was saying that and we misunderstood each other. But the issue is we're not saying water it down, but you got to know where people are to even adjust your message to speak to where they are, and so that was very helpful. And so there is a tension that you create in the room. And part of that tension is because, just to be honest with you, we all recognize that, man, the church is losing a grip on the culture. And now it's a little scary at times if you think about it,
Yeah.
It's a little scary when you're pastoring a church in a college town, and I think the number you used was 7 out of 10 people would say that they don't have any affiliation. One camp would go, "Oh, great, that's a bunch of people to reach," but that's not always the case.
I mean, look, I think the human side of us looks at that and says that's insurmountable, and there's a reality to like 100% with man that is impossible,
but with God,
nothing is impossible, right? Yeah. And so like living in that mindset that is not like, that is the fields are white for harvest. And I'm saying this to myself, like it's hard being a pastor in a place like this where you don't have like numbers upon numbers. You're not baptized. I mean, social media can ruin you for what you have, right? And it's not fair, but there's a reality of like, oh man, I wish the Spirit of the Lord was moving here. And I was like, this is not how it works, right? Like, and so to attune my heart to what God is doing and ask him to do things, and I can ask him to do things that then our church can reasonably do by ourselves. Like, it's exciting to think about it.
Well, a Vision Day really does help you work smarter instead of harder, because sometimes, I remember hearing a story that John Maxwell told years ago about he literally met a fella at one of his conferences that came up. The guy was really discouraged. And he came on, and during one of the breaks, John starts talking to this guy, and this guy walks up and he says, man, I just need you to pray for me. John's like, what's the matter, brother? He said, man, I personally knocked on 1,000 doors last year and I got one convert. And John goes, oh my goodness, that's awful, man. 1,000 doors and you got one convert? And he said, yeah. He said, well, John said, what are you going to do next year? He said, well, I guess I'll knock on 2,000 doors. And John was like, that's not a smart fella. You got to find new ways of connecting with people. And that's what Vision Day does. So what we did next is, after lunch, we come back and we review, because you already had one, but we review your mission statement, which we believe your mission explains why you exist. And your mission statement literally came out of the first thing I did with you, but I was there with
it came out of the first one. And we had this really convoluted mission statement with a bunch of words and syllables, and
nobody knew what it meant.
Right. And you politely insulted us, and we were like, okay, so this isn't going to work. And we came up with,
I've got to tell everybody this, because after I was with you for months and for years later, I'll get a text from one of you guys going, take that, Dale.
Yeah. Because it's funny. It happened again in our staff meeting. We're talking about an area where we need to improve. And so like the way that we improve is that like we've got these teams, we work through them, and so when we meet a checkpoint, we go, take that, Dale. And so we did that in our staff meeting today. It wasn't even me; it was one of our staff members.
Oh Lord, oh gosh. Well, anyway, if I can be the point of you throw all the darts at, that's fun. If it'll help you get on point.
It's facetious. We love you.
That's why we do Vision Days, though, is to help you get on point. And when you do the take that, Dale, it just means you're fixing that problem.
100%.
And so that was cool. So we revisited your mission statement. It was dead on with where you needed to be. So then what we do is we break down your mission statement and we go, okay, we believe your mission is for everyone. It explains why you exist, and everyone in the church needs to know it. But your vision is more for your leaders and more strategic. And so we say, okay, if we do a great job with our mission today, where could we be in 3 years? And this is a place where we kind of make you stretch and dream a little bit. What was the tension like for you in that particular place?
Well, like one, I'm not numbers driven. I'm input goal driven, because I can't control the Spirit of God, and so like that's the Reformed in me, and like I'm not terribly Pentecostal, which is whatever. And Lord, so I tend to
Lord help this man. He just
100%. It's 100%. And so as you're in a room, with a bunch of people, and like what you do is you go, man, I think the Lord can do this, and then you put the parentheses around it because you're a good Christian, if the Lord wills, right? And so, right, which is not wrong, but also like, how do you? And so I think what I've been reflecting on this actually from that moment as a leader, right? And our staff as, how do we? Because we love the Lord, and we know that nothing's going to happen outside of His will for this church, and so how do we pray and like plan for big things and invite Him in? And say, God, we want you to have this, like, would you give us this number without the if the Lord will being like the Debbie Downer. It's the bailout. Right. And so like, which I think what you experienced in that is part of like leadership weariness in the staff, and part of like how can we live in this and invite God to do big things and say that and have it be true, but also not be like the limiter of it. Sure. You know what I'm saying? And so I think for us, the tension was, it wasn't just, coming up with numbers. It was, I mean, how do we align our hearts in the right way to invite the Lord to do that? And like be really comfortable with that.
Yeah. I'm an evangelist at heart.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. See, so I think differently than you think. You're more pastoral at heart. But for me, there are two things that the reason why I do that vision part where we say, okay, let's dream a little bit. And, let's say if you have a church of 300 and we say, okay, if we do a great job with our mission and really implementing it, where could we be in 3 years? Well, if they say 3,000, I'm going, no, that's presumptuous. But if they say 302, I'm going to go, come on now. And the two things that drive that with me is, first of all, Jesus said just before He goes to the cross, in one of His comments, He goes, when the Son of Man returns to the earth, will I find faith in the earth? I don't see lots of faith in our churches. I see
Yeah.
people using programs and denominational plans and all this kind of stuff, and they're not really believing God, if you will. If that, hopefully that's not too Pentecostal, but they're trusting God, believing God to see Him do something great through their church. And the other thing that I believe more than anything, I don't care who you are or what size your church is or what town you're in, as long as there's still one lost soul, you're not done. Yeah. And so I think sometimes we sell ourselves short. I don't think Jesus is sitting on the throne with his arms folded going, I don't want to bless them. I don't want to work in those lives. I think he's looking for churches, men and women of God, who will believe him to do the amazing and the impossible. And so that's why we try to create, honestly, hopefully we're kind of doing it now, create that tension between being, okay, let's don't get presumptuous here. Let's don't be ridiculous, but let's stretch ourselves. And what I always ask you to do is let's just go a little bit beyond what you think you can do, so that if it happens, only Jesus gets credit.
Well, and like, if it is being like completely vulnerable, like that was a moment for me as a pastor, as a leader of the church, like that sat with me longer than anything else. Cause of like, I know that I want that for me. I want to figure out how to do that in my heart for my staff, to teach them that for my church, because I believe that. And so like, it's funny. I've got some good friends who are pastors here in town who are like awesome, and they're just like good men of God, and they're charismatic. I'm like, I need to go hang out with them. Like seriously, because I'm caught, like, because I want to know what it looks like to cultivate that in like a genuine way, or maybe it's something I've got to rediscover. Like because I want that for me, and I realized like in that moment, like there's nothing wrong with what we did there. But part of the reason I couldn't generate those numbers is because there was a part of me that felt like we didn't deserve it.
Well, you don't want to be insincere. You don't want to just, and I try my best when we're doing Vision Days to eliminate that insincerity. I don't want to just get us through a process, put down some numbers and go, boy, look at what we did. I don't get on social media and go, wow, look at what we did at that church. It's not about that. It's about what the Lord's doing in your heart, what he's stirring up in you. But there is a verse, and I've come back to this verse a lot lately, but in Ephesians, I believe it's chapter 3, it says, now to him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all you can ask or think. And then everybody preaches the sermon, but that's not the whole verse.
Right.
It says, according to his power that works in you.
Yeah.
This is what we're not seeing, if I'm honest, with most of our churches. We're not seeing his power working through us. And it's not because his power is limited. No, it's because we don't believe he's going to do that. Right. And so hopefully through this process, we can just, again, I'm not talking about hyper faith or none of that stuff, but just get to the point to where we go, and I learned this, and you read my book, and so you know this, but I learned that Jesus really wants us to do ministry from him and not for him. Yeah. And I think maybe that's your struggle, is that, your thing is, well, I don't want to, do something, that's for him. But he's like, hey, Mark, I put you in Missoula. Yep. I just want to work through you. And you know what? The thing I've learned as I turned 60 is that Jesus is not in a hurry. And I am so
thank God.
Thankful, man.
Yeah. Well, we're the ones who are in the hurry, right? Yeah. Jesus is walking. We're like sprinting by him and wondering like why our relationships aren't like real deep. And
absolutely. Okay, so we finish up, we do the mission, we do the vision piece. We take a couple of minutes just to kind of focus on what you're already doing. Really, it's just a chance for you to catch your breath and maybe tweak that. But then we come to this point where we all, as a team, we pull together and we select what is the number one issue that we need to work on. And then the team selects that, and then we break it down into bite-sized pieces. And this is where we assign teams. How did that work out for you guys? So
I think as we kind of diagnosed early on what the problem was going to be with, like, how do we as a leadership develop, earn, and like in some areas we need to regain trust, in some areas we need to develop, in some areas we just need to keep it. And so like it was this kind of amorphous like trust concept.
Let me dive in here, because it wasn't because, and this is huge, it wasn't because you guys had necessarily done anything wrong. You inherited an atmosphere of distrust toward leaders, not because of necessarily a moral failure, but just because leaders left and there was no closure.
Well, in the way.
So 30 years later, you're dealing with the fact there's not closure from something that happened 30 years ago.
Right. Well, and like the way they'd solved that problem more recently in the church is the pastor just leaves and get a new one. And so we agreed in the room.
Churches do.
That's right. We agreed in the room. We're not going to do that this time. But also like, and so I think for us, rather than saying, well, we need to solve like our open door, right? The front door, where it would be a little bit more concrete. We spent quite a bit of time talking about trust and trying to dial in what are the things we need to do, or where are the areas where we can grow in leadership trust. And so there were 4 different areas where we could grow, whether that was, getting our new elders in front of our people more and ministering more, or whether that was having like a functioning website, or
we're not going to go there, are we? We're not going to talk about your website that we talked about 5 years ago. We'll leave that alone. We're going to keep on moving.
Hey, a little too tender in the moment. No. That was a great moment.
It was, man. I'm like, what in the world's going on here?
You stepped on a landmine. I came loaded for a different conversation. It was
blew
great.
my leg off.
I did. Anyway, and so like it helped us think through, okay, what are the 4 things that if we work at this for a year and a half, producing trust, right? If we do this, that will affect all of these other things. So trying to create which is what I loved about this process, different than the Unstuck process, is we find the one problem. And the former Unstuck process, I don't know what they do now. Like you said, like
Tony created whole new things since I was there.
Whatever they do, I don't know. But like what I love about this is we find one concept, and then we kind of divvy that out into 4 different sections that we're gonna like split up and say, okay, if we work this for a year and a half, and we involve other people, we think that we can build more trust, gain trust, or keep trust as a pastoral leadership, which will then create greater growth and movement in the church in general, which is like, I mean, pastors only operate on trust. Like that's the number one commodity we have. Once you don't have it, it's so hard to get back.
Once you lose it, it's hard to gain it. And I want people to understand. So again, the atmosphere that Pastor Mark and his team had inherited actually happened years before they got there, even before they knew it. But if they don't address this, and what I love about it, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, this is an ambiguous kind of concept. It's not like, okay, well, if we'll just build 5 more buildings and make room, people will come. No, this is foundational truth of what we've got to solve. And so many of our churches have issues like this that need to be uncovered. And we've been taught, we live in the residue of the seeker and the attractional movements. And we've been taught that if you'll just do all this flashy stuff or stuff in the physical realm, it'll solve your problems. I'm telling you, that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you just got to go do a deep dive and discover what's got us stalled. Why are we stalled where we are? And what does it take to get going forward? And I'm so excited for y'all because I do know we uncovered the most important thing. We did develop a plan. Like you said, we broke it up into 4 quadrants. All this stuff is very practical stuff. This is not ethereal stuff. And this is not stuff there's some of it's real low hanging fruit you can already do. But the objective is to build trust in that congregation. And you do have a great congregation.
Yes.
They do want to make a difference, but they're kind of like, Jesus said one time, he said, they're like sheep without a shepherd. And when sheep don't do good if without a leader, and if they don't trust the leader, we got problems. And so we were able to come together, highlight this stuff, and then we broke it down. We assigned teams to carry it out. The good news for the lead pastor is we didn't put you on a team. You are there to speak into everything. And I'm gonna get real honest with you on why I do that. This is good. So the reason that I don't put the pastor on the team, one, is I don't want to add to their load.
Right.
I want to increase. I want them to feel like we've raised up a team to help them. But to be fair to the church, sometimes the pastor is the problem.
Yeah, 100%.
So when they bring me in to do a vision day, I want to leave them with a plan so that if the pastor decides to move on, they still get the value of the time we spent together. And the plan was still the plan because it came from the people. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think just to be fair and honest, like there are things I've done and said that have caused lapses of trust that would not be that in a different context, maybe not be the same way.
They were layered.
Layered in there. Yeah. And so like, I think it's important that that as we think about this, that I have my own stuff to own and all of that. And but the ability to come to that kind of unity together in a really sensitive topic. Yeah. Like this wasn't what we ended with wasn't like we needed to establish a pathway, which is somewhat like pragmatic. This was like, deep soul level stuff of the church that brought like some mourning in the room, but really good. It's like, okay, like what does it look like for us to, if this is a problem that is, and somehow we inherited it, and some reason because we inherited it, we didn't know what to do with it, didn't know it was there. Like, how do we heal that wound and move forward for our people?
If it had been me, if young Dale had been pastoring your church and had gone through that, I would have just been said, those folks need to get over it.
Yeah, right.
I didn't cause this problem. I didn't do it.
Yeah.
That doesn't work because I inherited this problem. And so I felt like when we finished that day, I've done, as I said, I've done over 50 of these. This was by far one of my favorite ever, because I've really felt like the Holy Spirit took us to and revealed to us a deep wound that you guys didn't, again, I've said it multiple times, you didn't necessarily create, but you inherited. And bad facts are still facts.
100%.
So perception is reality. And so I'm excited for you. I'm excited for that church. Honestly, Mark, to be just blatant honest, I'm excited for the people who are going to come to know Jesus, because we had this time together. This one day on a Saturday in August, we had that day, and Jesus is going to save souls because of it. And that's why I do what I do.
Well, you're going to love this too. We've already had our 2 meetings. We followed up. We're compiling our teams. And so in October, we will have had our first meeting. We'll have our first team meeting and be moving. So it's been great.
Well, I love your church. I love you as a person, as my friend. I would go hunting with you if you'd invited me. I love everything about.
We don't sit in tree stands. We actually move around, Dale. I don't know what you guys do in South Carolina do.
I may not do well with that, but I just love knowing that I get to have a part. And the thing I made available to you guys, I give you my cell number. I give you my email address. I am available. And actually, this happened before when I was there. Some of your staff would reach out to me with questions, even when you didn't, and you have. But I just want to help your church, and people are like, well, Dale, you can't do that for every church. Well, I ain't trying to do it for every church. I'm doing it for these churches, and we've trained other people. We have other guys on our team who know how to do vision days. It's very exciting because the process works no matter, it actually works even outside the country. We've had some done in Honduras in Spanish. And so the process works. So today, if you're listening, and you're like, okay, we just have no clue what to do post-pandemic or on this side of the pandemic. Here's what I want you to understand. It's worth your time to invest a day to sit down with outside eyes and do a vision day. And get honest about where you are. You don't want to go to a doctor. If you've got cancer, you don't want to go to a doctor who tells you, oh man, you're doing great, I'll see you in a year. You don't want that. You need that doctor to tell you the truth so you can get the help you need. So you can do what you need to do. And so many churches are that way. It's like, well, we just want to be happy. Well, right now it's not that happy, but we want to help you get on point with your mission, with your vision. The Great Commission is everybody's mission. That's no doubt about it. But how Mark does it in Missoula, how Dale does it in South Carolina is different. And so we just want to encourage you today, take some time. And Mark, you've done this before. I'm assuming you'll still be willing to do it. If anybody wants to reach out to you and find out what it's like to work through a vision day, are you willing to talk to them?
Yeah. And I'd say too, like, if you just want to talk about like what it's like to be a leader, and like, I got no stake in my own pride of this. Like, it's hard on the other side of the table. But like, I can't tell you how critical it was and crucial it was to have Dale come out twice. And the second time was different, like, because we knew what we were getting, and Dale visited the church the second time. So like, it just had a lighter experience. But like, I'm just telling you, like, even if a question, like, I don't know, what you'll find is like having Dale come out will clarify, it will clue in other leaders to the burden that you bear as a pastor. Yeah. And if you've got some people around you, like we had 10 people in that room, and I'm not under any illusion that every small church pastor has a staff like mine or elders like mine. Yeah. But if you have 4 people who you can get in that room who can be unified and walk with you and help you solve one problem, like, I can tell you, your church will be better, your marriage will be better, like your pastoring will be better, all because we're sharing leadership and letting the Lord kind of move the church as he wills.
Yes.
So I'd love to talk to anyone about it. Like, I'm like your biggest cheerleader, like, I love what you do. And we've done, like, our church has done a couple different other consultants in between you, and like, like part of that is our connection, Dale. Like, like God has put us together, but also there's something really unique about the way that you lead and that brings people in. And so I could not commend this process more for other churches.
One day you and I go sit down on the river up there,
Yeah.
wherever it is,
Yeah. Yep.
and talk about how God used us working together to bring people to the kingdom. And
Let's do
that's
it.
why we do what we do. So thank you, man. Thank you for being my friend.
Yeah.
Thank you for trusting, allowing me the opportunity to work with your church. I love your church. As I said, I'm
Yeah.
excited for the future and cannot wait to see what God does in the future. So if you're listening now and you're like, okay, I need to do a Vision Day, just go to the website and reach out to us and let us know. And we'll be glad to talk to you about how to do it. I think it's very inexpensive for what you get. And so we'll talk you through all that. But Mark, thanks again for your time. Thanks for joining me today. And just thank you for your friendship.
Yeah, no, Dale, it's been a joy to get to know you. It's been a joy to be a part of this process. And if you don't know Dale, like, he's not lying. You can call him anytime. It's not lip service. He's a guy who loves the church, loves pastors. And so at the very least, give the man a call, let him talk to you, let him encourage you, and let him come out for Vision Day. You won't regret spending that money, and you won't regret getting that kind of unity on team.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.